it. Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
So just another question about procedure. Is Shell's role as an angel investor or venture capitalist, or how does it work? Let's assume that the idea is successful.
Yeah, so GameChanger is more an angel investor, so because it's high risk, and in general GameChanger is also less interested in IP. We're more interested in, hey, can we use the technology to create value? But GameChanger doesn't bring you to really deployment. Hey, you need sometimes way more money to, of course, to bring it to deployment. So there are different funding mechanisms after GameChanger. It can be that Shell R&D is starting to invest in because they work with over 100 universities or sometimes small companies. But we also have Shell Technology Ventures, which is the Shell Venture Capital Fund. They quite often take a minority stake in investments, but they connect you with other venture capital funds to really make it happen. Yeah. But we're indeed, you might say, an angel investor.
So speaking of angel investors, since I deal with investors a lot, at your stage, more or less a seed stage, what are the rewards for Shell? If GameChanger came in and worked with our group, what skin in the game would y'all have in it when we go to the next group? Let's say, we'd love it if it was Stevie or Shell Ventures, but what if it was Exxon Capital? Right? What obligations would be negotiated?
So this is really tailor-made stuff. It ranges from just a donation. So what I just told you about the holistic land management and the grazing, we just donated a huge sum of money to Arizona State University to lead that project. So we don't want anything back for it. All the results are public because we think it's highly important. But it can also, generally it's not a charity. So you want some preferred type of rights back. And it might range from, hey, we want to have a first seat at the table when we negotiate about the next deal. It can be some exclusive rights of deploying it. It can be sometimes part of the ownership of IP. It really depends also what the other party, what their business model is. What do they have in mind? Are they trying to create the technology and sell it? Are they want to operate it? So that's also, it take at least 3 months to have a contract in place.
Does that happen with GameChanger or just with Steve when you get to the Steve stage?
GameChanger, yeah, we start with a contract.
Okay, so that'll be part of your contract negotiations.
Sorry, procedural question. So we're actually just submitting an idea on your website. We're not submitting it particularly for a review on July 10th. You'll be taking just a set of ideas that have been submitted on your website.
It'll be kind of fun to review that on July the 10th. I think that's a kind of an interesting thing, and also to do the kind of public panel session.
Sure.
It's kind of interesting to have that discussion.
So
we normally don't do that, but it will be kind of cool to do that in that way.
So it's open to everyone, the one on
And we just give a presentation slide set?
Yeah.
What about 5 minutes?
No.
10 minutes?
5 to 10 minutes. Depends on how many ideas we get.
So the online submission, you specify that you are submitting it for the July 10th? Okay.
Thanks for asking. Very good. Yes.
Do you also working on the biofuels or just?
Okay. Yeah, actually very good because you will ask for examples. We had actually a Shell employee 4 years ago who run into GameChanger, never heard about it. And we explained what GameChanger was. Said, wow, I have this idea for 15 years and nobody wants to do something with it. We said, okay, talk to us. And within 3 months, we did a large field trial with the guy to make ethanol in a very different way, much cheaper than any other way. Actually very successful, and then a year later we did a huge trial. So yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Has Shell or GameChanger looked at any biological solutions for treatment of the oil?
It's called MEOR, microbial enhanced oil recovery. So there are small companies out there who have special microbes who do something with the oil. They don't know exactly what it is. They either produce a surfactant, or they eat part of the oil, or they block pores. There are lots of different theories. A lot of people don't believe it, some people believe it. It's very hard to measure success. Yes, very interesting. Might be a very good interface as well also with the medical world to see what's been happening there, or absolutely, yes, there's a lot of microbes active in a reservoir. I didn't realize that, but also actually all the H2S coming out of the reservoir is actually because microbes are eating stuff there. It's unbelievable how many living things are in the reservoir deep underground. Yes?
Are ideas for enhancements in offshore oil recovery also potentially interesting?
Yeah, absolutely, but it's much harder. because it's way more difficult and more expensive to drill wells. So if you go offshore, drilling a well can cost you up to, I think, $100 million, because you have a drill ship, which is very expensive.
Right, there are more people coming by traffic and all, so I'll introduce myself. My name is Simrat Parmar. I'm one of the people involved with Captain Houston, and we conduct these lectures from time to time. But this particular lecture is unique in the sense that, as you have seen, we have great partnership with Shell, but what we are trying to find is if there are synergies between different disciplines and energy sector. My primary initiative is between medicine and energy, but there are many things out there. And today we have with us Ray and Henk from Shell. Henk is a game changer, and what we have planned to do is to at least describe what are the problems that are being that need addressing, or those are challenges for the energy sector. And this particular lecture is basically to make the people aware of those problems. And the second part of this particular series would be where the actual funding will happen. So today Henk will describe in terms of what they're looking for. And on July 10th will be the second part where ideas will be submitted, and we'll actually have them present. And if there is a technology or if there is a solution that the game changers find interesting, there is a potential of on-the-spot funding, because you basically need 2 game changers to make the decision. You don't need a whole big consortium, and we will describe that as well. But I think it will be important to align the solutions to what the problems are and what are the challenges that they are facing. So the probability of funding will be much higher. Obviously, if you have a brilliant idea and you are able to address some of the problems in energy sector, which are not addressed yet, those are welcome as well. So with that, I will welcome Henk to
Thank you, Simrat. Thanks for being here on the Thursday evening. See if the projector will survive. And if you're lucky it breaks down, then we can talk without pictures. My name is Henk Mooijer. I'm 24 years with Shell. I am about 5 years in the GameChanger program, and then we'll discuss what GameChanger is about. Basically 2 parts in this presentation. The first one is a little bit about innovation in a large energy company, and what Shell tried to do about it with the GameChanger program to really fund disruptive, radical innovation. And the second part is more about the challenge we like to bring in this to the community, and it's about extreme recovery. How to get oil out of a reservoir. And a reservoir is not a lake underground where you can put a straw in and suck the oil out. The reservoir is more something like this. And believe it or not, I put almost a bottle of vegetable oil in this rock, and it's in here. The question is now, how the heck do you get it out? And Ray is an expert in that area, and he will try to explain a little bit how the energy industry is doing that. But we're actually not so successful in doing that. On average, we only get 35% of the oil, or gas a little bit more, but oil out of the reservoir. It means that 65% stays there, which is, of course, a big problem. And it makes you go to very difficult areas to get more, like Alaska, which is not so easy to go there. So we'll talk about it as well. So first about innovation in a large energy company. If you think about innovation in an energy company, lots of cool, but also big and extremely expensive stuff. From deep water to stuff in the Arctic to underground heaters to wind energy, solar energy, geothermal, fracking as we all know it. Everything is on there, and everything is very expensive and a lot of money. Sometimes such an offshore platform has a cost of $5 to $8 to $10 billion even. Enormous investment. That projector is very creepy at Norway. So cool stuff. On the other hand, there's lots of challenges. Huge population growth still in the coming years. Energy demand will double. It means also that lots of people will live in cities, and there's a lot of vehicles around. So to cover that with batteries for electric vehicles is still a long way to go. And especially this population growth and energy demand goes very, very fast. So if you look at what that means actually for an energy company, you have to be innovative. And also our new CEO still tells us we need to be the most innovative energy company. And probably all of them will say that, but it is important. And if you look then at data, These are a little bit older data. We see Shell spends an enormous amount of money on R&D, 5.5 billion I think in 2010. We have a lot of patents. We have a lot of people in the technical community. We have over 1,000 PhDs, etc., all beautiful data. And also if you look at 2012, we spent over $1.3 billion in research. And then also if you look at alternative energies, so not oil and gas, but stuff related to carbon capture, alternative energy, CO2 related, $2.2 billion in 5 years. So of course I'd like to impress you a little bit with these numbers, because they're huge. And it leads to all these wonderful projects, and in this way we can deliver energy to the world. And that can be the end of the story. That's normally how a Shell presentation ends, because it's all wonderful success stories. Reality is a bit harder. Innovation is actually very difficult. Especially if you want to do some revolutionary innovation, very, very hard. We all know that. Especially when you come up with ideas which are weird, too weird maybe, or too risky because you don't know whether they work. So how the heck can you invest in those ideas? Or what we quite often hear in GameChanger, that's not our strategy. And then we ask the question, well, maybe the strategy is wrong or the idea is really stupid. Take Kodak. And I'm making fun of it, but this is not simple. Huh? If you look at Kodak, they're not there anymore. But they invented a digital camera, as you know. Huh? And the first thing was a huge box, took 23 seconds to take a black and white picture. You stored it on a cassette tape, you still remember what a cassette tape was. But of course the value of such a thing compared to what was out there was absolutely worthless. Who wants to have a digital camera? Absolutely worthless. And it stayed a long time that the value was way lower than what was existing. There was a whole industry built about the 1 hour photo processing, beautiful photo cameras with film in there, whole industry infrastructure around it. But at some point in time, obviously the digital camera broke through and only certain specialists now use photo film. So how do you ensure that also in the energy industry you bet on those type of new disruptive type of technologies which have the chance of breaking through without wasting your money too much? And that's not simple. Shell's answer was to come with a GameChanger program, and that happened 15 years ago, and we survived many reorganizations, so something must be good about it. What we actually do, the mission is to invest in inventors that have the potential to drastically impact the energy future. And the silly picture shows it a little bit. We're trying to find those people who are not locked up and can think out of the box actually. So what we do, we try to find those inventors. We listen almost to any inventor with any ideas, especially when they're unproven and unusual. And we try to validate those ideas quickly and affordable. So we try to give a little support. We fund ideas, some tools. We give space to play around and being shielded a little bit from the immune system and some advice. That's what we try to do. So basically the GameChanger program is there to find those opportunities which might be the new breakthroughs. That's what you try to do. It can be really game-changing. It's all about fastest route to proof of concept. So how can you determine proof of concept fast and affordable without wasting a lot of money? And that's in everybody's interest. So it's not about the full development. It's about how can you test that an opportunity, the key risk, the key hurdles for an opportunity, how can you de-risk it really fast? So it's fastest route to failure, you might say. Failure is an option. But most of the GameChanger projects actually fail and they never reach proof of concept because they were too risky. And that's okay. It's actually easy for us to turn our portfolio to less risky stuff, but then less game-changing. So that's the dilemma. So very rapidly, let me talk to you a little bit about forced serendipity, about how GameChanger works with panel decisions, and fastest route to failure, and how we work with the portfolio. So let's start with serendipity. I always like to show this kind of complicated picture to see where do you think most ideas come from. And you see on this axis it's a kind of an X where the market is. Here are market drivers, here are non-market drivers. So people in this box invent because of money, because they want to make a lot of dollars. And the guys here more want to solve a problem. And then here have this column is individuals and close to organizations. These are networks. So box number 4, non-market drivers and a network of people Well, a typical Shell research laboratory is in the box number 1 because you need a badge. You need a badge to get in there. They ask you a lot of questions. You can't bring a film camera, all this type of crap. So, where do you think most inventions are made? Is that in the IBM and the Bell Labs and the Shell Labs, or is that in an open network of people? And you can already hear a little bit from the way I asked the question where it is. If you look from 1600 to 1800 and all kind of inventions, you already see, wow, lots of stuff is made in 3 and 4 from non-market drivers. It makes sense because there were no large research laboratories, so it makes some sense. You know, look in the recent years, 1800 to present, there's actually very little in these large closed research facilities. Most of the stuff is done in open networks for non-economic drivers initially. It's because people are frustrated with the situation. They want to solve it. They can't stand it anymore. That's how people invent and innovate. Not because their boss tells them to do so. And even the big inventions are sometimes made in the organization, skunk time, on the Friday afternoon, outside the program. That's how it works. But it's very hard to explain it to research management who thinks they can control everything. So here you go. Most inventions are made by users in open networks. That's very interesting. Now, if you know that, we also start to realize that actually most brains are outside Shell. That's not so hard to realize that, but if you're locked in your research lab, you think that you have all knowledge, and it's obviously not true. So how do you connect to people who actually have a very different view on the world? Invention is also connecting the dots. So it's quite often an invention is connecting knowledge from one area but with knowledge to the other area, and smack them together and you get something new. And a skateboard is a very simple example. Connecting the dots, you can also see it here. I'm not sure whether you can read it, but a cat always lands on her feet. Bread with butter always lands on the butter side. You all know that. Peanut butter also tied up. And that's a cool invention to create energy. So good example of connecting dots. So how do you connect to these people? This is a beautiful picture from 1927 about the Solvay International Conference on the electrons and photons. And these were just all the specialists in those areas all together on one picture. You see Einstein, you see a lot of other people there. So that was the conference. Today, very different. How do you connect to these people? How do you collaborate? How do you connect the dots? Huge challenge for GameChanger. We're very interested in this area, but also very difficult. So one of the tricks to force serendipity and don't let it just be a coincidence is to increase the scope of these encounters. So it's look in unusual places, meet unusual people, have unusual experiences. And the other thing is to talk about your challenges. So if you only talk about success stories, nobody's going to help you because you have solved everything. If you're going to explain to them how difficult it is, people are start working for you and start solving your challenges. Obviously, this is one of the reasons we're here at Platform Houston, where there will be potentially a lot of people who don't know anything about oil and gas, and that's actually perfect. That's an unusual place. You guys might have connections or ideas which we have never thought about. So that's the reason we like to sponsor Platform Houston and like to connect to these unusual places. We do it in many places elsewhere as well. What is difficult for a GameChanger program is where do you look for unusual ideas? Because you can't find them so easily, it's difficult. How do you communicate what your challenges are in a way that is compelling? And you try to do a job there, but it's not easy. How do you connect to people? It's very difficult. How are you being trustworthy? Challenges in the energy industry are sometimes extremely complicated, so a single solution is seldom there. It's always a connection and combination of certain things. And then, on the other hand, Shell is like a castle. That's a typical Shell research lab. Well, the real innovation is a kind of a white water stuff. You have to go with the flow. You have to take some risk. You can't plan it all. Things happen, and you always see if GameChangers at the edge of an organization, that organization trying to pull you back because it's very scary that you give presentations at the Platform Houston because who is there and how's it with IP and are you talking too much and are you saying bad things about Shell? You get all that kind of stuff. So they actually don't know we're here. So how is GameChanger working? We work with 4 criteria for every idea we get. We look at potential value, because if you work for Shell, you have to be very arrogant. We're only interested in these highly valuable stuff. If it's millions, what millions? We don't care. It must be billions. And that's the disadvantage of working in a large organization. So it needs to be high. It needs to be game-changing. How can it be really different? Think about a digital camera, really earth-shattering difference. Look at novelty. It can be a business model, it can be technology, but it must be revolutionary, not evolutionary, not a small improvement. And that's very important, and we're looking for those step changes, which are also highly risky. We're looking for a doable plan. We're not an idea box. So if people come with an idea to GameChanger, we want to see the capabilities that they actually bring it forward, and can they demonstrate proof of concept. They need to do something with it. It's not, hey, here you have the idea, go for it. And the last thing is, why Shell? We always say we're not in the chocolate business, so we're not making chocolates. We're doing something with energy, but game-changer ideas can be very disruptive to what we're doing now. So if someone's coming with the new cold fusion solution, GameChanger is very interested to work in this area. Okay, how does it work? And that's important, because at the end of our presentation we come back to this. You submit an idea to GameChanger. We do a very rapid pre-filtering of ideas. So sometimes there are very weird ideas in them which have nothing to do or are totally non-novel. If your idea has a chance of meeting those 4 criteria, you're very rapidly invited for a screening panel. And that's just an informal chat of half an hour with 2 game changers. It goes very rapidly. You don't have to prepare stuff for that. You can, but it's not necessary. We take a decision at the spot. If you pass that panel, you're in the maturation phase, and then one of the game changers is going to work with you to define what is actually proof of concept. Why is this difficult? What is what are the real hurdles in this idea? How can you bring it to proof of concept? What does it take? And you present that idea basically to the extended panel, which are 3 game changers, 3 experts from the business. And how that works is that you pitch your idea. We ask questions for clarification. The experts will give an advice to GameChanger, real Shell experts in that area, like Ray. And they might say, well, this is completely a worthless idea. And it happens sometimes that the 3 experts, sometimes there are 8 experts, all say, we don't like this idea, and GameChanger is still going to fund it. Because it might be a very risky idea, but if it works, it can really be interesting. We're most fascinated always when experts say, wow, this will never work, but if it works, it will be very cool. So it's very interesting. And if they all say, we like the idea, it's maybe not so much GameChanger. So we find a balance. And then you execute the project, you reach sometimes toll gates, you reach proof of concept. So we have a portfolio of 50 to 60 projects. On average, such a project takes 2 years, because sometimes people have to build equipment, have to do experiments. And the average funding for that is kind of an angel investment funding, is around $500,000. But that's the average, so sometimes it's much lower, sometimes it's much higher. All right. Fastest road to failure? Yeah, the only thing what I want to say about it, if you look at a game-changing idea, and start to brainstorm in a very systematic way about what are the key hurdles, the key difficulties, why will this never work, why would this fail, all that type of stuff. And you start grouping those hurdles on potential impact on value. So if you put that high, you put your hurdle high, it is really a showstopper. If you can't solve that, it's the end of your idea, it's a game over. And you put it on the axis difficulty to test. How difficult is it to get some kind of an answer there? And you put stuff over here, and that's easy to test, but it's really showstoppers. GameChanger is not interested in that stuff which you need to solve later. We're trying to find this stuff here. And that's how you actually make your proof of concept plan. Stuff over here, number 4, is really a nasty one, because it's hard to test. It might take you 2 years and 3 years, but it can still kill your project. So we have to think very carefully, how can you de-risk that element already much faster than waiting 3 or 4 years. Think about the Iridium satellite phone, which was launched a few years ago, I think, well, not exactly 2 years ago. They went bankrupt in 7 months after launching, I think, 18 satellites. Because the satellite phone, where you can make a phone call all over the world, didn't work in buildings. And actually they discovered that later. They knew that, but it was not tested well, so they went bankrupt. And despite the fact that there were 18 satellites in there. So that was really number 4, and you might have, looking backwards is always easy, but that's what you try to avoid. All right, portfolio of options. If you look at the whole energy space, where a lot of Shell research is active in certain areas, deep water, looking at unconventionals. Here's the chocolate line, so that's non-energy, we're not interested in that stuff. GameChanger is interested in white space, stuff we're not even doing research, stuff that's not even on our radar screen because we never thought about it. Or we're trying to be at the edge of what is going on. That's what we're trying to do with GameChanger. Back again. So, by the way, chocolate is the gray area. There's a lot of stuff which is really in the spotlight where Shell is very active. And GameChanger works with 2 areas, and that changes every other year, where we're extra focused. And one is future energy technologies. So we're really looking at non-oil and gas that can be from wind and solar and hydrogen, energy storage, whatever you can think of. And the other is extreme recovery. Today we're going to talk a little bit more about extreme recovery. Okay, Platform Houston. Yeah, it's a different innovation world, very different than the Shell labs, where it is difficult to get in. People connected to these type of environments are different, driven, disruptive, fast, flexible, vulnerable, risk-taking. While the big dinosaurs, yeah, they have resource and expertise, but they have a lot of challenges, and we need solutions, especially I think from those type of areas. It can be very interesting. Okay, so far the first part, what GameChanger is and what Shell tried to do with GameChanger. Let's talk about GameChanger challenges, especially for Platform Houston. 3 areas. First of all, GameChanger is interested in any energy-related idea when it's meeting our 4 criteria. So novelty, high potential value, doable plan to reach proof of concept, and energy-related. And mind you, in those 4 criteria, we never ask the question, what is the chance that this will work? We actually do not care. If the value is high enough and the novelty is high enough, let's just go for it and see if we can reach proof of concept fast and affordable. Don't ask the silly question, what is the chance of success, because it's kind of a silly question. Future energy technology, so everything in that area we're very interested in. And then extreme recovery. So today is a kind of an info session. So how is oil recovery actually working? How does it actually work? How is an energy company trying to get hydrocarbons out of a reservoir? And then back in July the 10th, we come to a panel session. I will show you what it is about. So, yeah, sometimes you get this question here, why the heck are we recovering oil? And especially when you give such a presentation to students who are very focused on future energy technology, and they should. But they also ask you, maybe you should just keep the oil in the ground and don't let it be there, because it gives climate change, and they're absolutely right with that. On the other hand, if you look at the enormous increase in population and the enormous increase in energy demand, and you look at projections here, and this is the World Energy Outlook, you see that renewables are enormously increasing, and the green bar is what you add from 2011 to 2035, so that's an enormous and earth-shattering increase. But still, on the total energy demand, it's very important. It's maybe 25 or 30%, but the rest you need a lot of hydrocarbon stuff as well. Even coal plays a role, and oil is very important, and gas is very important. So to meet the world energy demand, to ensure that also in China and in India you can have a refrigerator, it's actually very important to get more hydrocarbon resources. So summarizing it again in a lot of words, and that stuff is also on the poster and on the cards. On average, we only get 35% of hydrocarbons out of a reservoir. That's actually very little. If you could increase that from 35 to 36%, it is enough to have a 2 to 3 years whole world energy demand. It's enormous. So the value there is absolutely enormous. And already explained how important it actually is to increase oil demand. Okay. Ray, it's actually your turn, because you can explain a little bit how it actually works to get oil out of a reservoir. Because I don't know anything about it.
Okay, perfect. Good. So my name is Raymond Jones. I've been with Shell for 1 year, actually on May 20th. I was 10 years with Dow Chemical, 5 years on the downstream side, 5 years on the upstream side developing new products. While I was at Dow for about 5 years, I was focused on enhanced oil recovery, all the way from developing chemicals all the way to implementing them in the field. So I've got quite a bit of background on this. I have a PhD in mechanical engineering, and I'm currently in a research and development role at Shell, somewhat focused on this, and then some other areas that they've got me looking at. So what I've got about 7 slides. There's no way that I can go through and give all the details of how oil's recovered out of the ground, but I'm going to shoot this from about 50,000 feet on these 7 slides. And what I would say is the best thing is, as I'm going through this, feel free just to stop me if something doesn't make sense, or you don't understand a term, or you just have any questions. Just give me just let me know, and we'll stop and discuss it. Probably the biggest challenge in getting oil out of the ground is like Hank was saying. Okay, so here, this is a rock, right? And it actually has oil in it. Okay, this is a sandstone rock. This isn't that hard. Okay, so it gets even harder from this. Now, what you can imagine is, typically reservoirs are thousands of feet below the ground. So there's no way to look in a sight glass and say, what's going on? Technology is developed at the surface, and then we implement it, hoping that it does what we think it's going to do down hole. But thousands of feet down, you don't know, and that's one of the big disconnects. So if you look at that sandstone rock, it even gets as challenging as trying to get oil out of something as dense as that whiteboard right there. So it gets, the hurdle is all over the place. And then, of course, when you think about oil, oil has different viscosities, different densities, a lot of different compositions. And based on the composition, there's unique challenges for trying to move it out of something like that, or even something like that. So I've got a couple slides that will kind of guide us through how someone like Shell or something is going to approach getting oil out of the ground. So let's say we go in, and our geologists, we look around and we say, you know what, we think there's a formation down here. We're going to drill. We're going to try and explore and tap into this new resource. So as soon as they do that, the reservoir is in what's called primary recovery. So everything under the ground is going to be under pressure at some temperature, because you've got all the weight of this overburdened rock sitting on top of it. So when you discover oil and you tap into it, it's in a rock, but because it's got high pressure, and you put in your soda straw, the pressure in the reservoir is going to help drive that oil out. Okay, and so just using a natural pressure, you can get some of the oil out. There's a lot of different drive mechanisms in a reservoir. So when we talk about oil, typically there's oil, there's water, there's gas down there. The gas can be dissolved in the oil, or it may just be sitting by itself. And the interaction of all those fluids, when we tap in there with our soda straw, is going to affect how that oil moves around and how much we get out. So there's a lot of upfront geology and seismic to try to understand what's down there before we tap into it. So let's say that we tap into an oil reservoir. This is a very likely scenario. So what you have is you've got rock, okay, that's curved like this. This is actually called an anticline type formation. And you may have oil, and you may have water sitting on the bottom. And so when you tap into it, the oil this is under pressure, so it's going to want to come out. Now, the water that's below it is at a higher pressure because it's below the oil. And so as you release the pressure here, the water tends to want to rise up and help push the oil out for you. Okay, and so that's called a natural water drive that occurs in a reservoir. And that's one mechanism that when you tap in can help displace oil. Sometimes you may have a scenario like this where you've got oil that we want to tap into, we've got water, and we've got gas sitting on top. It's called a gas cap. And so as we release the pressure in the oil, then the gas tends to want to expand. So it pushes that oil down into our straw, and the water wants to rise up. So the two together help squeeze it and push it up the reservoir. And that's called a gas cap drive. And then, of course, a lot of this, when you talk about especially light hydrocarbons, you've got oil, and then you've got maybe methane and propane and butane and other gases that are dissolved in the oil because the oil is at a high pressure. So when you tap into it and you start to relieve the pressure, those gases start to come out of solution. It's kind of like taking a Coke can and shaking it up, and then whenever you release it, that gas comes out, and that gas drive helps push the oil up. And so that's called a natural gas drive. And these are three scenarios that are very likely in a lot of reservoirs that are mechanisms that help you move through primary recovery. Now, having all of those, and just by using the natural pressure in the reservoir and using these mechanisms, you typically only get about 5 to 10 of the oil out, 5 to 10% of the oil out. And the reason why is because it doesn't take long to start depleting the pressure in the reservoir, so that drive mechanism goes away. And then, of course, you've got a well drilled here, and you've got maybe a huge reservoir. So how much of the reservoir a given well influences is typically not a lot. So you continue to drill, and you continue to work, use these to your advantage to try to, grab some additional oil whenever your primary recovery. But so anyway, we've got about 5 to 10% out. So once the pressure goes down in the reservoir, so an operator is never going to want to deplete the pressure all the way down. So once it gets down to a certain level, we got to do something different. So what typically happens is a reservoir is going to go into what's called secondary recovery mode. And what that means is an operator is going to go in and start drilling. So here's a production well. Here's our formation. We've got oil down here. So what he's going to do is he's going to go in and start drilling additional wells around that producer, and he's going to start injecting water. And the water is going to go down the formation and help pressurize it back up, but it's also going to create a sweeping mechanism to try to sweep the oil back over to the producer. And so many, I would say the majority of reservoirs that are in the US and mostly in the world are under a water drive or in primary recovery. Okay, and eventually what will happen is, once you start injecting water, here you're producing a lot of oil, but that water is going to make it over to the producer, and you're going to start producing water. In a lot of reservoirs, especially with high oil prices, you're producing way more water than you're producing oil. Thousands of barrels more water than you're producing oil, but it's still economic to continue to operate like that. And so cycling this water, cleaning it up, re-injecting it, cycling it is a very common operation. In many companies for doing what's called water flooding, which is secondary recovery. Now, you can typically get about 15 to 20% more oil out by water flooding, and the reason why is there's a few reasons. One is oil and water are immiscible. So, just due to the velocity and the viscosity of the oil, you can water, you can push some of the oil out. But because oil and water are immiscible, there's a interfacial tension, or they create forces in the reservoir that tend to want to try and lock some of that oil in place because they're immiscible. And then a lot of that oil is stuck on the surface of the rock, and the water doesn't wash that off. Matter of fact, there's a ton of surface area in that rock, and there's a ton of oil that's coating that rock. And the oil and the water tends to want to push it out of the pore space, but leave it sitting on the grains of that rock, which is a ton.
How much can you change immiscibility ratio?
You're talking about injecting immiscible gas?
No, the water. You have water and oil, but the water could, as you change the composition of the water.
Yeah. So in a second, I've got a slide. So there's chemicals that are used that try to make water, get rid of that fact that oil and water are immiscible. There's chemicals that get put in that try to lower that interfacial tension and make them more compatible. In a second, we'll talk about that. That's a great question. So one challenge is that oil and water are immiscible. They create what are called capillary pressures in the formation that try to lock some of the droplets in place, and that's due to the fact that oil and water are not miscible. Water doesn't do a very good job of scrubbing those things off the rock. There's a ton of oil there. And then also, this picture looks like a nice uniform reservoir. It looks, homogeneous, nice in formation. That's not what it looks like down hole. In a typical formation, we've got cracks. And if you talk about a reservoir, that's, a rock is basically like a sponge. You characterize it based on porosity, so how many pores, how big the pores are, and permeability. And permeability is really how fluids flow through a porous media. And so, in this situation, you've got lots of contrast in permeability. So when you inject something, it's going to look for the path of least resistance, and it's going to go there. And so there's tons of the reservoir that you're never going to contact by injecting water, because water is going to find those cracks. They're going to find the path of least resistance, and it's not going to go out and sweep the whole reservoir. So that's one of the reasons why you only get an additional 15 to 20%. So water's used because it's cheap, but it's not very efficient. So how do we what do we do to make things more efficient? So basically, if you back up, so this 35% is basically primary and secondary recovery. So 5 to 10% that you get out by using the natural pressure in the reservoir, and then another 15 to 20% that you get out by injecting water. And that's where that number comes from. Okay? So once an operator's been injecting water for a long time, and he's producing, say, 99% water out of there, he's got to do something different because the economics don't look good. So what do? And that comes up, and that's where we move into what's called enhanced oil recovery. And enhanced oil recovery is really a broad term. There's tons of technologies out there that have been developed for this, and I'm going to present a few of them. I've actually developed technology in all of these areas, so I've got quite a bit of background, and I can tell you every one of them is flawed. But there is some usefulness, and some of these are implemented, and some of them are pretty useful. But at the end of the day, none of these can capture all the oil. There's unique challenges with each, and so coming up with ideas of a better way to tackle this is, I think, that's a hot topic all the time for everybody. So this is a perfect platform to think about this. So one thing that an operator may do when he gets through injecting water is to inject carbon dioxide. So if oil is if the composition of the oil is just right, and it's under the right pressure and temperature, what happens is if you inject carbon dioxide at a very high pressure, then you can make the carbon dioxide act like a solvent. So like we were saying, I lost my picture here, a lot of that oil is stuck on the rock. It's stuck on the rock, and we could wash it off with water. It's like taking and spraying your driveway with water when you spill oil. It doesn't come off, right? So if you can make the CO2, if you can put it in such a way that it acts like a solvent, it can scrub that oil off the rock. But you have to have the right conditions in the reservoir. The temperature and pressure has to be here, and the composition has to be just right for that CO2 to be miscible and act like a solvent. And so this is, in the Permian Basin in West Texas, this is going on all over the place. Okay? But some of the challenges are, for this to work, you have to have pure CO2. So you can't go get CO2 out of your car or out of a smokestack at a refinery, because that's CO2 plus nitrogen plus all kinds of stuff, and that doesn't work. You have to have pure CO2, 99% CO2, and get it up to a high enough pressure for it to be miscible in the oil and get that displacement that you're trying to get for more. So Jackson Dome, so basically CO2 is being pulled out of natural reserves all over the U.S. Jackson Dome in Louisiana, there's a fixed number of deposits that people are pulling from. So, but this is a very efficient method if you can find the CO2 and you have a reservoir that is lined up for this to work.
Good question. Is the CO2 in this process recycled like they recycle the water?
Absolutely, because the CO2 is very cherished. So you're going to have a fixed amount of CO2 and you don't want to get rid of that. So it comes out, it produces with the oil, it actually gets cleaned up, so the water gets knocked out of it, it gets cleaned up, gets recompressed and re-injected. And so, yeah, it's actually almost as valuable as the oil itself is. So yes, it's recycled.
What technologies do you use to understand whether it's economical to continue to inject CO2 and when to figure out when to stop injecting water?
Yeah, so it's really an energy balance. So you're going to put something in to the reservoir that's going to cost some amount. So like for instance, let's say CO2. Okay, well CO2, we have CO2 in this room, right? It's a gas. Well, CO2 that's a gas doesn't help me any. I've got to compress that CO2, to maybe a few thousand pounds. And then it's got to be pure CO2, and then I got to deliver it with some means downhole. That's all cost. The CO2 is a cost, compressing it's a big cost, and then delivering it.
But the fact the process to actually predict, how much recovery you're going to get based on that CO2, so you can invest into it. That's done ahead of time.
A lot of modeling. Okay. A lot of modeling. So CO2 flooding's been around for a long time, and so you know, a lot of lab experiments. So you can measure, you know, a particular oil. If I get the CO2 up to this, will it be miscible in that oil and displace it? So a lot of lab work and a lot of modeling to say if I inject it, what do I think my recoveries are going to be? And so that's, you know, but but you're going to do a ton of that typically before you inject CO2 into a reservoir to try to understand what the impact will be. But at the end of the day, whether it's economic, it's what I put in versus what I get out kind of deal.
So what about the technology of capturing CO2 from atmosphere and making like those?
Yeah, anthropogenic CO2. So there's so right now what's probably state of the art for that, and this is not a Shell thing that I'm reporting, but from my past history, is basically chemicals, amines, are basically, it's a liquid. You take CO2 and you basically bubble it through that, and it helps capture that CO2, and then you do some stuff to try and liberate it or let it release. And so people are always looking for ways of trying to capture, take stack gas from a refinery and try to scrub the CO2 out of it, leave the other gases so that they can use it for EOR. And I can tell you that there's technologies that work but are not very economic, because at the end of the day what happens is you got to put, once you capture the gas, you got to put more energy in to get it back out. And so that's a lot, you know, so that's a very non-economic. So people are definitely looking at technologies for trying to capture CO2 for EOR, but you know that's a lot of development needs to be done for that to be commercial.
What volume of water and what volume of CO2 are we talking about here for a typical field? And then what are the transportation storage issues for water and for CO2?
Yeah, so those are good questions. It's, you know, so the volumes really depend, all right, on the size of the formation. You know, you're talking about typically injecting, you know, like a major operation in the Permian field, you're talking about, you know, tens of thousands of standard cubic feet of gas being produced, you know, being injected in a 40-acre pattern. So if you look at a pattern, you say, okay, let's look at a 40-acre piece of reservoir that's under the ground, and you can look these numbers up. You know, it's very common that you'd be talking about you know, a few thousand you know, cubic feet per day being injected into that. You know, it can be a lot more depending on, you know, how much cycling is going on in the reservoir versus how much is actually spreading out. With water, and there's numbers, these numbers are, you know, you can get these on the web. And you know, I forget, so you may produce, or I'd say it's not uncommon to think that a well that's on water injection may be producing, you know, hundreds of barrels of water for a single barrel of oil. But in terms of storage, if you do a CO2 pilot, you know, what typically happens is you're going to buy CO2 off of a source out of one of these natural reserves. You're going to take it into your facility, and then you're going to have to store the CO2, and you're going to have to build a huge compression station, because as it comes back out of the ground, it's got to be cleaned up, recompressed, and re-injected. So the investment on a CO2 project is pretty high.
Is it trucked there to begin with? Is it
it comes in on pipeline. Yeah, so the only trucking that'll go on is someone, say like a Praxair or something, may come out and inject CO2 in a brand new well to just tell you how CO2 injects. So how much injectivity do you have? But in terms of doing this in the field, it's going to come in on a pipeline, and then you're going to bring it into your facility through a pipeline, and then you're going to do whatever you're going to do your distribution. So it's definitely going to come in on pipeline.
You know the 40-acre example that you gave us.
Yeah.
The tertiary recovery. Do you inject on the four sides of the thing? And
so wells a lot of times are in what's called quarter 5-spot patterns. So basically, imagine you've got a well, and I've got 4 injection wells around it. Okay, and so that way, whatever I'm injecting, CO2 or water, is going to sweep in towards where my producer is at. So yeah, that's pretty much the way they're laid out. So this is kind of the workhorse in terms of EOR today. And the reason why it's a proven concept, people, you know, I wouldn't say everybody can get CO2, but putting CO2 down in a reservoir doesn't screw anything up. So it works and doesn't screw anything up. So the next thing that someone's going to do, let's say that I've got CO2, but I've got a reservoir that the pressure's low, and I know that the CO2 is not going to be miscible. Okay, well, I'm not going to inject CO2 if it's not going to give me that solvation effect, because then that's not going to do anything. So someone may go to what's called chemical EOR. Okay, so chemical EOR is basically about injecting chemicals to try to either get fluids to spread out more or to help scrub some of that stuff off the rock and displace it. So one part of that is what's called polymer flooding. And I would say this is you know, there's a lot of pilots, and there's some big operations over the Middle East doing polymer flooding. But basically the main concept is you're going to take a high molecular weight polymer, okay, kind of like some of the stuff that's in your hand soap or hand lotion. You're going to put it into the water, you know, typically around 1,000 parts per million, and you're going to viscosify that water, because remember, one of the issues with injecting water, so in the picture it looked nice, a nice waterfront pushing the oil over. This is typically what it looks like. So this is a cross-sectional area of a water injector in a production well. And so I inject that water, and typically what it wants to do is finger through the oil, because the oil is viscous, it's locked to the rock, and so that water is going to find the path of least resistance, and it's going to beeline to the producer. It's going to bring me some oil, but it's going to beeline towards the producer. And once that breaks through to the producer, it's just going to stay on that line. So there's a lot of this reservoir that's not going to get touched.
Are you trying to match the length of the polymer chain between the oil and the polymer flooding fluid?
Well, typically what controls so this is probably the industry standard polymer that's used in a polymer flood. It's called partially hydrolyzed polyacrylamide. And basically, in terms of designing polymers, what happens is you know, one of the big challenges is a lot of this. So you're going to put it in water, you're going to inject it in the reservoir, and the idea is to thicken up the water and try and prevent this from happening. Okay. Now the challenges with polymers is that most of them don't like salt. And when you get them high enough temperature or you put enough salt on them, they come out of solution. So if the polymer comes out of solution, you know, in little bitty insoluble balls, it plugs up the reservoir. And so you got to design the chemistry such that it can survive the conditions down hole, whether it be salinity or temperature. And it also gives me this viscosification. You know, it doesn't, you know, it basically viscosifies like I think it does whenever it goes down hole.
Are you developing this stuff yourself? You buy it off the shelf? What do you do?
Well, this you can buy off the shelf. This you can buy off the shelf from SNF Floyer or Nalco. You know, there's several companies that buy.
Do they make it for that, or?
Actually, Dow Chemical is the one who developed this, and it has many applications. Matter of fact, I was watching extreme weapons for the military. And actually what they had done, polyacrylamide goes in many different applications. And anywhere from diapers, so basically super absorbent diapers, well that's this polymer in a certain form, you know, for absorbing water and stuff, that, you know, one component. And but it's used, but what these guys had done is they mixed it in water, and they had it on a Humvee with a cannon. And so what they showed is if you had like a crowd, a disruptive crowd, or if you wanted to stop somebody, you spray that stuff on the ground, and it is just as slick as can be, and people are just flopping around everywhere. So polyacrylamide is used in a lot of applications. It was not developed specifically for EOR, but what people have found is that it's very water soluble. You need very low dosage of it to viscosify the water. But some of the deficiencies is that it's very salt sensitive, and if you get it to elevated temperature, it's going to come out of solution. So it's used in reservoirs that have conditions that are conducive to it, but there's other polymers that people are trying to develop that will handle the more harsher conditions. And it's cheap.
You might, if you haven't done so already, you might consider going to a manufacturer of a heat treating quenching polymer, because the people who develop those might have different set of goals or brains or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, I will tell you this, almost all chemistry, and I'm running out of time here, right? Okay, so anyway, so this is so just kind of moving on, this is another technology. It's also using polymers and then injecting soaps. So surfactants. Surfactants are surface active agents. You put it in with a polymer, helps scrub, so the polymer helps, with the sweep efficiency, less contact with the reservoir, the soap scrubs it off, and this is another technology. And then for heavy oil, so those are technologies used for light oil. For heavy oil, you can't inject anything. It's just too thick. It's like peanut butter. So this is something called bitumen, and this stuff is tens of thousands of centipoise thick. It's just like peanut. It's like black peanut butter. And so the way to get that out of the ground, one method is injecting steam. So you inject hot steam, it melts the stuff, and then it just gravity drains in for you to produce it. That's another method of EOR, and there's tons of challenges with those. So anyway, these are kind of some typical EOR methods. I can answer probably anything you've got as far as questions in these if you want to dive in any deeper. But basically the main challenges are that the oil's in that, it's way down in the ground, oil composition, there's geology variations make it extremely challenging to get out. Water flooding is really the way to drive it out, mostly. You can get two-thirds of it, about 30% of it out. But then some of these other EOR methods are things people are trying to establish as commercially viable methods as well. So anyway, I know that's a lot of detail, so sorry about that.
What's more important, enhanced gas recovery or enhanced oil recovery?
Well, I would say liquids are king. So, so I would say, I don't have any, I'm not speaking on behalf of Shell on that, but I would say, I would say both have value, and there's different technologies for each. So, I can't say one's more valuable than the other, but these are all technologies aligned for oil, not for gas.
What's the main difference between injecting the water for this kind of recovery versus hydraulic fracturing? What's this the two?
Well, it's what do you want to do with the water. So in a hydraulic fracturing, you've got rock and you want to create a fracture in it. So you inject it at a very high pressure, like a liquid hammer, and bust the rock. Here, we're not wanting to bust rock. We're injecting it at a lower rate, and we just want to get it into the rock and create a drive mechanism to pressurize the rock and push the oil over. So this is not hydraulic fracturing. Yeah. Anything else?
So what happens if, like, suddenly you get a recovery from 35 to 60 or 70? What will be the price of the oil? Like, did it go down to $1 a gallon or $2 a gallon?
Man, I don't know, but if you come up with something that goes from here to here, I'll say you'll be king. So I know that for sure.
But that will also, there's more oil, so that means the price will go down. So,
Yeah, I don't know what that would, but what I would say is that, like Hank was saying, there's tons of reservoirs that are being produced today, and the majority of those are injecting water, and we're producing a ton of water with a little bit of oil, but it's still economic to do. So what you do is a lot of those easy finds have been made. So to make them, to find new ones, you got to go to Alaska. You got to go deep water, Gulf of Mexico and stuff. So if you can, find ways to take those existing reservoirs and make them more economic, that's really the key challenge here. That's the real. I think there's a huge uplift for doing that. So, yeah. Cool. Okay.
Okay, that was a mini lecture in upstream energy industry, how to get oil or gas out of a reservoir. But basically, we want you to work on this because actually we can't. Yeah. Despite the fact that there are tens of thousands of people working on this problem for decades. We're still 35, maybe 40%. Shell is that range. 60% is still there. So how can we recover oil differently? And basically why we put this challenge out in groups who don't know anything about energy is that you might come up with complete different approaches. You might forget everything what we do and you just start with why are these guys drilling a hole? Why are they not getting it out in a different way? Or why are they not making a mine tunnel? Why are they not... I mean, you can have all kind of arguments why that will not work, but the different concepts, the different approaches might be very interesting. So, I'm not going to repeat all of this. This is also on the cards we have here. Basically what we try to summarize here in kind of generic language why it is very difficult to get this stuff out of the ground. Because it lives in a complex three-dimensional network, you cannot map it very well, you don't understand what the network is, the fluid is pushed down, the stuff is stuck in pores, the pores are not connected, all the type of stuff, it's all on the card. If you would actually give this to a lung doctor, he might recognize maybe 8 of those challenges. Oh, that's the same what's happening in my lungs, so I have the same problem there. And we use this medication to get the mobility of a fluid a little bit better. Oh, that's kind of interesting. What are you using? And what's the concept based on? So that's actually what we try to achieve a little bit with this generic language here. So I'm not going to read it, it's on the cards. Basically, what we put out here as a challenge is, do you have ideas that have a significant impact? First of all, new and significant step-out approaches to recover oil from a reservoir. How would you actually do that? And believe it or not, we put this rock in front of primary school children, whole classes. And it's amazing what these guys come up with in 5 minutes. It's actually really amazing. The stuff you work on, they come up with it in 5 minutes. It's 10-year-old kids. Why are we not heating it? Why are we not pulverizing it? Why are we not putting soap in there? Etc. etc. Really amazing. Can you put magnets on it? Very, very intriguing things. So expect way more from you guys. Can you take a robot into a reservoir? Can you do something in a reservoir? So experiments we do to also test new technologies. We drill a core, we have to take a plug out of there, do it in a laboratory. Very expensive, very time consuming, very difficult. So why don't we measure way more stuff subsurface? So how can you do typical experiments you do in the laboratory, how can you do it on the subsurface? Deep under the ground and get data much faster, so you can do experiments much faster. Those are a type of typical questions we have, and way more, and they're also on the card. So basically, what we're trying to do is ask you and your networks, because you all have huge networks, to think about these type of things. Are you intrigued by this problem? How can you do something about it? Submit your idea to GameChanger. We do a little pre-filtering. This it's kind of interesting. This might meet our 4 criteria. You might be invited to come to pitch for our panel at the 10th of July in the same venue here. We do kind of an open screening panel where we really have the discussion, ask the questions for clarification. That might be very interesting. Once you pass that panel, we start to work with you to really help you to turn that idea into reality, to see if you can bring it to a proof of concept phase, and then we can start funding your idea. That's actually what we're trying to do there. So that's how it is. Last picture, I think that you've seen enough pictures. Yeah. Again, those are the criteria: value, novelty, doable plan, and energy, obviously. So if you have an idea, this is the process. You submit it. We have the screening panel the 10th of July here at this location, and then we go from there onwards. That's basically what it is. Our website.